All right, guys, welcome aboard. Glad to have you here for the August 31st edition of Mac Forum Sunday video chat. Hope that you enjoy the time here this evening. We have a little bit of Mac news for you, forum roundup as usual, and a couple of tips and tricks this week. The tips and tricks focus primarily on iTunes, and specifically iTunes 12. So we'll get to that. Well, let's dive right into everything. This week, let me just enlarge this a little bit so I can read it. Read the name. We have our usual number of welcome to our newest members. We have now a total of over 280,000 members. And the newest member is, I'm going to spell this one because I know I'll mispronounce it. It's BSVINGEN. So welcome aboard. Welcome to all of our new members that have joined in the past week. We hope that you enjoy your time at Mac Forum. One of the advantages of joining, no cost. One of the advantages, in addition to the fact that it's free, is you get to ask your questions. Periodically, we have unregistered folks post our in the contact us area of the forum, which is generally an area reserved for forum-related issues and problems with the forum software, that kind of thing. The reason we don't suggest that you put your individual problems in that area is that that thread is only seen by the forum moderators, which is a relatively small number of people in comparison to the total number of forum members. So the best chance of a member seeing your question and being able to answer it, and getting it in the hands of the most members, is by joining and posting your question with as much detail as you can. Things like which Mac you're using, which version of OS 10, things like that, what you might have installed recently, anything like that, any changes that have been made that might contribute to the issue. And if you don't know where to find this information, that's okay. Most of it can be found by going into your the Apple menu in the upper left corner of your screen and choosing About This Mac. And in each of the operating systems, each of the incarnations of OS 10, you get a bit of detail about your machine and what the specifications are. What gets presented changes a little bit from one version to the next, and how it's presented to you changes a little bit, but the basic information is there should you either forget the amount or not know exactly what it is. As in, for example, if you've got a new machine or something of that nature. So do check that out. Gather together the information, post your question, and we'll see what we can do about answering it. All right, let's move on to some of the other information. Of course, the forum update. The forum owners spruced up the look of the forum a little bit, and that's still getting some discussion in the forum, pros and cons. The Mac Forums app for iPhone, which I prefer to surfing the web on the iPhone. I prefer using the Mac Forums app. It just makes it a little cleaner. I'm not a big fan, for me personally, of surfing the web on the iPhone. It's got nothing to do with the speed of the phone and everything to do with the amount of scrolling, unless you get a website or a layout that's been specifically designed with mobile devices in mind. Don't mind it quite as much on the iPad, but for me, the iPhone and surfing any forum or any web page for that matter is almost always an exercise in frustration. And that's not something that's specific to the iPhone. That's been true for me since I started using smartphones. Initially, it was complicated somewhat by the speed of my internet connection, my old Palm phone, but even with a faster connection and the larger screen of the iPhone 6 Plus, which helps a little bit, I still find surfing the web on the iPhone something of a frustrating experience. So if you're there, check out the Mac Forum app. You can find it in the App Store. It's a good way to surf the phone on your surf the forum on your iOS device. All right, let's take a look at some of the other things that have come up. First of all, in other forum-related news, we're still seeing lots of questions about Time Machine, about the best way to back up, about as we get closer and closer to the release of El Capitan, we have some people who are just now shifting to Yosemite. We're starting to get questions about running Windows 10 on Mac. Some people are trying that. I haven't tried it yet. And keep in mind that as of today, I don't think the drivers for Bluetooth have been updated yet to compensate for Windows 10. Excuse me. That, you may be okay on that. Some people have been. I've seen some reports from people who are running it without a real problem, but I haven't tried it yet. I think it's one that I'm going to hold off a little bit on until I have some time to set it up, just to get my setup corrected and get going the way that I want it before I add Windows 10. I've got Windows 7 in a virtual machine, and to be honest with you, I don't use Windows a whole lot. I need it for one or two websites that periodically decide not to work with the Mac, a couple of work-related websites, but that's about it. I can use Windows. I choose not to most of the time, except at work and for work-related things. So not a lot of opportunity for me to use Windows there, but I am going to at least take a look at Windows 10 at some point, although I may wait a little bit for it to stabilize. One of my friends used to tell me back in the days before Vista that he never ran a variant of Windows, no matter what it was, until about the third service pack. And this was from a guy who liked Windows. He never ran the new incarnation until at least the third service pack because of issues that he had with being an early adopter. He just didn't like the headache of dealing with that kind of situation. So I may wait a little while. I've already had a couple of friends ask me about some issues I had with Windows 10. I'm debating on it. I think I'm going to hold off until I have the time to really get it set up correctly and experiment with it a little bit. You'll also find this week in the forum, as usual, the debates, I should say speculation, are probably about to compound because there's an upcoming event in the Apple world where they're expected to make some announcements about upcoming hardware. The Apple TV, the newest Apple TV model is expected to be announced. We'll have something on that in just a moment. So we'll get to that in just a second. In fact, let's go ahead and dive in. I had originally scheduled the tips and tricks first, but let's go ahead and dive into this with the Apple news. Some of you are aware that Apple's newest music streaming service. Apple Music has a 3-month trial period that you can try it for free for the first 2 or 3 months until you decide if you're going to like it. Well, while I was cruising Kirk McLaren's iTunes forum, I ran into a posting there that Ian Rogers, who had been apparently heading up that project at Apple, heading up the Apple Music project, has left Apple in favor of some other project unrelated in Europe. Officially, he is leaving Apple to join a European country or company rather in an unrelated industry. And there have been some jokes made, I'm sure, about the fact that he left the company before the 3-month trial period was over of Apple Music. If you've been following Apple Music for a while, you know that while there are some nice things about it, there are a number of users that have had some issues with it and with potential damage to their library. So there have been some jokes that I've seen over the net in the last few days about him leaving the company before that 3-month period is over. Of course, we probably won't get much of an official announcement as to why he's leaving. But if you would like to read more about that, the story originally appeared in the Financial Times. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes. And while I was over at Kirk McLaren's iTunes site, Kirk is sometimes referred to as the iTunes guy because of the number of articles that he has written about iTunes for Macworld. Kirk is big-time audiophile, and he is very well versed with the ins and outs of iTunes. And he's opened up a forum recently that I'm starting to find very interesting as I try to navigate some of the ins and outs of iTunes. One of the things, and I generally like iTunes. The one complaint that I have with it at the moment is that as they've added more and more things to it, it occasionally slows down. And there are times when it may not be as intuitive as it was initially. If you remember the old days of the initial release of iTunes, you'll know what I mean. It's not that it's a bad program, but it can be somewhat daunting to you as you're wrapping your head around the way it works. And so he has some very good site out there. And one of the things that I found interesting this week, Kirk's written a short piece. I think it's in Macworld. I have a link to it in the show notes about methods of playing audiobooks on the Mac and on iOS devices. Some of you may have noticed that with recent incarnations and updates of the iPhone operating system, iOS 8, recent updates have moved audiobooks out of the Music app and into playing in the iBooks app. Now that is not a huge change, but it does bring with it some changes in the way audiobooks are handled. In the past, they have been synced through iTunes. Some people have played them back that way. So we'll have something about that. He also mentions a couple of other audiobook players. If you have Audible, he talks a little bit about that one. And here's a tip that I picked up from reading the first few pages of Kirk's iTunes book, Taking Control of iTunes 12. This little tip: if you are used to running audiobooks in iTunes and you've now had them shifted over to the iBook app, one of the things that you need to be aware of, if you buy your audiobooks from Apple, you need to be aware of one thing. With other content such as music, movies, etc., 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 you can go into your account, your iTunes Store account, look at purchases, and be able to download things that you bought previously. Some of you were using that as a backup. I'm going to tell you two things about that that you really need to know. One of them I knew based on experiences, and one comes from Kurt. First of all, the one that comes from Kurt. When you go into your purchases in the iTunes Music Store and look at them, although you will see the previous movies, music, etc., the one thing you will not see there as available for re-download is your audiobooks that you might have purchased through Apple. So make sure that you've got a good backup of that, because you cannot do like you can with so much of the other content and just re-download if you need a backup. That's Kurt's tip, and I want to thank him because I did not know that. Most of my audiobooks, I haven't got a lot of audiobooks, but they've come from primarily from Audible, so I have not run into that issue with Apple's audiobooks yet. But that's a good thing to know, and I'm glad I knew that before I had some kind of major disaster. Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to re-downloading your content, I've had to do that before because of a hard drive failure with the NAS device that was storing my iTunes library. And I ran into an interesting issue. A friend of mine reminded me that I could go in and re-download the content, and I went to one particular album and found that out of an entire album of roughly 30 songs, these are old Vanguard folk songs, Woody Guthrie, Cisco, Houston, etc. Out of about 30, only about 5 of them were still available for download. I had originally downloaded the entire album through iTunes Music Store several years ago, and in the meantime, I guess there had been some changes in the licensing agreement, and only a couple of the songs were still available in the iTunes Store. Fortunately, I had a backup of that album on CD. So the moral there is, although that ability to download previously purchased content is there for everything but audiobooks, don't rely on that as your backup for your iTunes library, because there's always a possibility, as licensing agreements change and the like, that you will run into issues. So go ahead and take care of that. Make sure you have a good backup. Another tip that came along from Kurt as regards to iTunes is that you can use the notification center to have iTunes show you track information about what song is playing. It will pop up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen where all your other notifications pop up, be there for a second or two, and then disappear. The one thing that I forgot is that the notification center also has an iTunes widget that you can install in your notification center. And that widget, one of the advantages of that widget is that it gives you some basic playback controls, which you do not have in the notification center version that doesn't, without that widget. The way that you get to the widget, to get it up and running, okay, to add this widget, go into the notification center, which is in the upper right. It's the farthest corner of your screen, usually right next to the spotlight magnifying glass type icon. You'll see the 3 little lines there that indicate notification center. Click there. When you click there, make sure, look down at the bottom and make sure you're in the today mode. You should see an iTunes widget in the list. Click on it to activate it, make it turn green. That way you can have it pop up when you need it. And that gives you one more way of adding playback control. Of course, you can do that also, basic playback control, by right-clicking the iTunes icon in the dock, and go ahead and change controls from there as well. So, as with most things, Mac, there's more than one way to control things. So that's the second of our iTunes tips for the night. And the last one doesn't necessarily come from Kirk specifically, but I do have to give Kirk credit for helping me to realize this. iTunes, particularly in the way it sorts information, is so much of what you do in iTunes is sensitive to tagging and accurate tagging. If you want to create a smart playlist and you want that playlist to be accurate and make sure that it includes the things that you want, having your music tagged appropriately is a good part of that. Some of the Genius functions depend upon tagging. I found out through some experiences that I had with my library, and this is where I have to thank Kurt. I was going nuts, basically pulling out my hair, getting a few gray hairs, trying to figure out why certain information, certain albums, certain tracks were not in the right places, and it seemed like no matter what I did, it was something in iTunes that was causing a problem, and I couldn't figure it out. I read one of Kirk's articles, which is one I've linked to previously from Macworld, and he pointed out the importance of making sure that the information in the sort field, when you go into iTunes and you start looking at the tagging, this is true no matter which version, any of the recent versions of iTunes that you're looking at. When you do a get info on a track or an album, and you're looking at the sorting, make sure that information is correct the way you want it, and that there is information there in those sort fields, because that's how iTunes, that's the first place it looks in terms of managing the sorting. Where I had an issue was some of my information was correct in the track names, but it was missing from sorting, or it was slightly different in the sort fields. In other words, for example, there was an extra space there in the sort fields that wasn't in the other tracks or anything like that. So you want to make sure that you have that information and that it is accurate. That will really cut down on the amount of grief that you get from iTunes. Thanks, Kirk, for reminding me of that. That when I fixed that problem, even though it took quite a bit of time, when I went in and started fixing that problem, it cut down significantly on the number of iTunes-related problems and sorting-related problems that I was having. And then, of course, one other one, and this is a little quirk that I had noticed once before with audiobooks, because I tend to play audiobooks on my computer most often, and I play them through iTunes. I had noticed this a while ago and fixed it without exactly realizing what I had done to take care of it. So here goes. Some of you know that in iTunes, they have an interesting feature called Up Next, where you can add a song to the Up Next list add an album to the up next list, and basically stack up multiple songs so you don't have to be at the computer selecting songs that you want to play. Well, here's the quirk that, once again, I read from Kirk's book. I had experienced this before, but never really tracked down what was happening. If you go into iTunes, let's say you're looking at an audiobook, such as, for example, War of the Worlds, or something like that, or like, for example, I have Audible a while back put out a collection of the old Dragnet radio series. And it's about 15 different tracks, each one about 7 to 8 hours long. And you will notice something rather interesting. If you're in iTunes and you've tagged your audiobooks as anything other than audiobooks, book, movie, etc., as just about anything other than audiobooks, they'll go into the up next list if you want to. But if you tag them as audiobooks, they won't go into the up next list. It's been a while since I tried this. I generally do not put iTunes or audiobooks rather in my up next list, just because most of them are quite lengthy, and I don't necessarily want those in my list. I'm going to sit down usually and listen for half hour, 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. Not long enough to want to keep going with that for an extended period of time. If you like adding audiobooks or chapters from books to your list, to your up next list, then untag them as audiobooks and tag them as something else, as music files or something of that nature. And the last comment about tagging, this is something that I may have mentioned before. Just real quickly, this one occurred to me because, once again, it's something that I use frequently, and I'm finding it kind of helpful. I have some music that, for example, if I organize by genre, I have trouble deciding, does it belong in this group or does it belong in this group? And I tried a couple of times using the genre field to get iTunes to recognize multiple genres, and that didn't work. And it wouldn't work when I tried to do a smart playlist. What you can do, though, is if you have music like that, or music that you just can't decide what to do with, put some kind of message to yourself in the comment field when you're editing the tags. And then you can use that as the basis of a smart playlist for you. And if you find that you need to add multiple items to the comment field, you can do that by separating them, just so I think you have to use commas in between. And then you can use anything that's in that comment field as the basis for a playlist. On a couple of my albums, I have where they were recorded in the comment field, plus additional genre information or other things that didn't fit well anywhere else. Granted, it's time consuming to do that, and most of my music does not have that, but it is a handy thing to have and to use when you need it. And it's not something that is mentioned very often. All right, now the next thing, that takes care of most of our tips. As you can see, this week it was iTunes related stuff. I've been kind of monkeying around with iTunes a little bit, trying to get a better handle on certain things. Trying to get it to be, it's been behaving kind of nicely for me, but periodically I go in and try to figure out new things about iTunes, and that's kind of where I am at the moment. I'll go in sometimes and I may spend a couple of days trying to figure out new things in preview, new things in iTunes, or I'll see a post somewhere on the forum and it will remind me of something that I had forgotten that I don't do very much. And I'll go back and check it to see if it still works. So that gets rid of our tips and tricks for this week. I hope you enjoyed those. I want to mention a couple of little bits of Apple news for the week. 9 to 5 Mac is reporting that some analysts are talking about the sales figures for the Apple Watch, Q2 sales figures. The IDC analysis reported they projected they're expecting 3.6 million units shipped in second quarter, which would give them, if those numbers are correct, would give Apple approximately 20% of the wearable market, of the overall wearable market. Apple currently sits just behind Fitbit in terms of sales volumes. Fitbit in Q2, I believe, has reported approximately 4.4 million sales. There's some speculation that the Apple wearable division may have been a little more profitable than Fitbit, strictly because the Apple Watch is a little more expensive than most of the Fitbit units. You won't see specific numbers from Apple. I know we have a number of forum members who have the Apple Watch, and many of them are reporting, that as the watch has been out for a while, now they're seeing. I know Lisa mentioned that now what she's seeing is where people initially said, "Oh, that's cool." Now they're wanting to know specifics about it. How do you take a phone call? How do you respond to a message? So we've gotten beyond the purely it's cool factor into specifics of how do I use it, and is it something that would work for me in my situation? And I'm still up in the air about that one. There are situations where I can think of that the watch would be very helpful to me. But on the other hand, right now, it's just not something that I need, if you will. If I had that amount of money available, I can think of other things that I would do at the moment. It's an interesting idea. It certainly, in many ways, has some aspects that I would consider more useful than some of the other wearables that I've seen. But I'm going to hold off for a little while. And as you'll see from these numbers, I mean, apparently a lot of people have decided that they really like the idea of watch and what you can do with it. Of course, we know that we're supposed to see version 2.0 of the Watch OS coming out. Probably at this, there is an Apple event coming up in a little more than a week. And everyone is expecting Watch 2.0 basically to come up there. There is also, that's probably when the new Apple TV will be announced. 9 to 5 Mac has indicated that there are a number of Apple products that will be designated as obsolete a day or two before the next Apple event comes up. Among those that they are suggesting would be obsolete would be the original Apple TV, the late 2009 era Mac Mini, the Apple LED Cinema, the 24-inch, the Cinema Display 30-inch, the 2007, second and third generation iPod Touch, third generation iPod Shuffle, fifth generation iPod Nano, and the iPod Classic. All of these will either be designated or expected to be designated either vintage or obsolete across all Apple markets worldwide. Okay, this is based on some leaked internal documents. You know about that. My opinion about that is always wait until you hear the actual announcement, because sometimes these leaks are, you know, speculation. But it's a pretty good bet, I think, that these devices uh, will go into the vintage or obsolete status. Typically, Apple does that about 5 to 7 years after manufacturing of the device has been discontinued. Of course, the Apple TV in this list is the original one. The one that's expected to be released soon would be the third in the Apple, or maybe fourth now. I kind of lost track somewhere. Apple is expected to hold a new press event on September the 8th, and they're expected to introduce some new iPhones and the long-awaited next-generation Apple TV set-top box. There's been quite a bit written about that. I'm waiting to see what that is, what's going to happen with both of those. I know what the speculation has been, some performance improvements with the Apple TV, and of course there's been all kinds of speculation about what will be included with the new iPhones. I'm not going to rush out and upgrade my phone right now, just because I did that not too long ago. Contrary to popular belief, I do not have to have the newest, latest iPhone. You know, no, you can't record that and hold it against me. It's nice to have the newest, latest, snazziest iPhone, but you know, realistically, right now the 6 Plus does what I need it to do and a bit more. They would have to really go some to convince me to upgrade right now, especially since I'm not at an upgrade point on my contract right now. But it's always fun to see what they're going to come up with and what features they think that we cannot do without. I find that Apple users tend to be very loyal once they find devices that they like. I mean, there's always the element that has to have the newest iPhone or the newest iPad, the newest this, the newest that. And while that's nice, the other element are the people that I know who buy a particular device and keep it for a long time. You know, my current MacBook Pro is from 2008. Fortunately, it's still going right along. I had a pretty good clip. It does what I need it to do. Does it slow down sometimes? Sure. But it's still doing what I need it to do. My iPhone 4 was okay. It was starting to get a little obsolete and show its age, but it did what I needed to do. I upgraded to the 6 Plus because we changed carriers. Had it not been for that, I probably would have kept using what I had. My wife would have still had her iPhone 3GS, and the only reason I didn't still have my 3GS is that somewhere along the way I had dropped it or something and wrecked the volume control on it and couldn't make any adjustments to the ringer, etc., 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 which is how I ended up with the 4. I tend to, when I buy Apple gear, keep it for a long time. So for me, the reason for keeping up with the new gear is predominantly to help out those on the forum that are asking, is this a good time to buy? Should I buy this one or that one? And it does, it's kind of a good mental exercise, keeping up with that, because generally by the time I buy a new one, I've been looking at them for a while and I've already made up my mind which one will work for me and which one's best for my personal use. That's one that I'll end tonight with just a commentary, if you will. It has to do with one of the more common questions we get on the phone, and that is it time for me to get a new machine? Really, I mean, yes, we can help you with that question. But the person that has to answer that question, I think, is probably you. Here's what I mean. If you let's just take my 2008 MacBook Pro for example. Virtually any machine currently shipping by Apple right now is going to be faster than the machine that I have. The question is the performance difference worth it to convince me to upgrade, to buy the newest model or close to the newest model? And here's where I think it becomes a subjective term. You can ask us and we can tell you by virtue of benchmarks roughly how fast the new machine is compared to the old one. But here's the question that we can't really answer for you. Speed is a relative term based on how patient you are about something and how quickly you need something to happen. Here's what I mean. My machine is starting to slow down a little bit when I play with some of the video files that I do on my website. If I were in a professional environment where I need to turn out video quickly, I would have to replace this machine. But I'm in a position where the video stuff that I do is usually very short clips, or it's not being done in a time crunch. So if I set it to render and it takes a while, it's not that big a deal other than the fact that it's slightly annoying to me that it's taking a while. But in terms of lost revenue, that's not an issue. If I were doing this professionally, yes, then needing to turn it over quickly for clients would cause me to upgrade long ago. That's what I mean by relative speed. Does it do for internet surfing, web, mail, that kind of thing? It does well. Playing back iTunes, all of that it does really well. There are only a few things that it slows down on right now, and these are not things that are mission critical for me. If I needed to, I could let them continue forward on their own, and I have from time to time set something up overnight and just let it run while I'm asleep. That's not as possible. Well, it's possible, but it's not practical if you're using the Mac in a professional environment where it's your income, your livelihood that's on it. So that's what I mean by relative speed is an important consideration. Only you can really answer that question, but we can kind of help you a little bit to decide, okay, here, this model has this advantage, this model has this advantage, which one would be best? Or maybe it's time I wait a little while. Sometimes people will decide that, and that's okay. Our goal in the forum is not necessarily to recommend the latest and greatest Apple hardware. Contrary to popular belief, we are not connected with Apple in that way. What we try to do is when we ask a question, we try to give you a legitimate, honest, straightforward answer. That's why sometimes you'll see disagreement among our members. You know, one will say, do it this way. One will say, do it this way. But at least you hear both sides of the equation, so to speak. So keep that in mind as you're looking at the new gear. I'm looking forward to the next event, September the 8th. I wish it was a little bit sooner. I'm kind of like a kid at Christmas when these events come around. Even if I know I'm not getting the latest, greatest, snazziest thing for Christmas, it's kind of nice to see what the other kids are getting, you know? So on that note, we're going to call it a day. I hope that you've enjoyed this edition of the Mac Forum video chat. I've enjoyed being with you this evening. And I will see you again in the forum during the week and next Sunday for the regular Sunday video chat. Have a great evening, folks.